"This land belongs to us. If you don't stop right now, we'll sue." Her shriek hit me like the crack of glass under pressure. Margaret Lanning's face flushed crimson, her features tightening into sharp, furious angles as she stormed toward me. I had just finished pouring the first layer of concrete, my boots dusted from hours of labor, when she suddenly lunged across the property line. Before I could even respond, she snatched my blueprints from under my arm, the ones I'd spent years refining, ripping through the vellum with the desperation of someone clawing at a lifeline. Shredded pages fluttered to the dirt, landing in misshapen clumps before being scooped up by a sudden gust and scattered like wounded birds across the foundation. My carefully drawn columns and load-bearing beams dissolved into confetti in her hands. "All of this is illegal," she shouted, her voice vibrating with the kind of rage that silences crowds. "This community doesn't accept outsiders, and we will not allow this project." The crowd flanking her murmured uneasy agreement, like a Greek chorus bred from years of HOA intimidation. Yet the irony was as thick as the cement hardening at my feet. I had registered property rights, signed, sealed, and protected 10 years ago. I wasn't a squatter or outsider. I was the one true legal owner of this land. And Margaret Lanning had just drawn the battle lines. I didn't shout back. I didn't even step toward her. Instead, I let silence hang in the air, the kind of silence that cuts sharper than words. Then, as she trembled with adrenaline and the crowd pushed in tighter, I reached into my jacket. The motion was calm, deliberate, practiced. When my hand emerged, gripping a thick envelope, the effect was immediate. Conversations died mid-whisper. The smartphone cameras, raised by gawking onlookers, steadied. Even the HOA lawyer, Richard Blackstone, lean, perfectly pressed, exuding courtroom menace like cologne, stiffened almost imperceptibly. Because what I held wasn't just a deed. It wasn't even just paperwork. It was leverage. It was the beginning of her end. The morning had started differently. The sun had just begun piercing the pines around my grandmother's old lot when I fired up the concrete mixer at dawn. By 5:30, sweat prickled my brow, and the smell of wet cement poured into the air, mingling with the sharp scent of lake water and pine needles. I was calm, focused, already imagining the skeletal frame of the office I was building, right on the footprint where my grandmother's humble cabin once stood. Every detail had been calculated, every permit secured. My practice as an architect demanded precision, but here it was personal. This foundation wasn't just concrete and steel. It was legacy. Then came the telltale sound of heels. Click, 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 like a metronome of impending war. Margaret appeared from her black Mercedes, striding like a general entering hostile territory. Her ash-gray hair was set perfectly in place, not a strand shifting despite her fury. Her navy blazer caught the light just enough to scream, "I run this place." Flanking her were coffee-clutching neighbors, some already raising their phones to record what they thought would be another HOA victory. 7 years she had ruled this neighborhood with fear. 7 years of suffocating fines, threats of liens, weaponizing bylaws. Where others saw manicured hedges and trimmed lawns, I saw the fingerprints of her tyranny etched into every brick and blade of grass. "Stop this illegal construction immediately," she commanded, her voice tempered with the strange authority of someone who had never heard the word no in her life. I set my clipboard down deliberately and faced her, keeping composure wrapped around me like armor. Beneath it simmered a different fire, the calm rage of someone who had seen tyranny before, just usually in the courtroom rather than in a cul-de-sac. "Mrs. Lanning," I said evenly, "I have every legal right to build here." I reached for my phone, intent on showing her the permits and approvals filed in triplicate. With startling speed, she batted the phone from my hand. It skittered across the wet pad, the screen disappearing in a splash of gray concrete dust. The crowd gasped. Margaret stepped forward, her perfume wafting like smoke from a grenade. "Your papers mean nothing when they violate our community standards," she hissed so close I could feel the heat of her words. Then she snapped. In full public view, she lunged for my rolled blueprints and shredded them. Blueprint fragments rained like torn flags into the freshly poured concrete, sticking against the wet surface in bizarre fossilized shapes. Her composure cracked fully now. "This neighborhood knows what you are. A fraud." Her voice screeched so loud that even distant dogs erupted into chorus. And then, as if summoned by her climax, the Lexus appeared. Richard Blackstone emerged, a lawyer whose reputation clung to him like a shadow. He was clean, cold, immaculately dressed, every detail on his suit sharpened to knife edge. He surveyed the scene, the destroyed blueprints, his client's manic fury, the waiting throng. Then he spoke in that measured cadence that lawyers use to dominate both courtrooms and living rooms. "I see we have a situation." That was all it took. Margaret straightened instantly, tugging at her garish blazer like she could reassemble her dignity at will. Her fury was still raw, but she tried to tuck it behind Blackstone's smooth authority. By now, nearly 24 neighbors had gathered. Some leaned on fences, others sipped coffee to mask voyeurism as casual morning routine. Phones recorded from every angle, and the looks, some nervous, some gleefully entertained, told me exactly how this community worked. Margaret fed them either fear or spectacle, and spectacle to them was delicious. I didn't feed them rage. Instead, I gave them silence. And then, slowly, deliberately, I reached into my jacket and drew out the manila envelope. Margaret's hawk-like eyes locked onto it immediately. Blackstone's mask faltered. He knew. The crowd pressed closer, pulled by instinct. The workers even shut off the mixer, its spinning drum grinding to silence. "This," I said in a voice just loud enough to carry, "doesn't just prove I own this land." I tilted the folder, catching the light, letting paper edges catch curious eyes. "It proves that Margaret Lanning has been lying to you, all of you, for 5 years. Lying about something far bigger than property lines." Her face drained to chalk in seconds. The practiced, manicured predator exposed to daylight. Around her, murmurs stirred like wind through dry leaves. The hunger in people's eyes hardened. For truth, for scandal, for blood. Blackstone's careful expression broke into something new. Panic wrapped in professionalism. Margaret had shown crack, and he had just seen the wedge that could split her open in public. I didn't open the envelope. Timing was key, and strategy was my inheritance as much as the land. So I tucked it calmly back into my jacket. The crowd, momentarily satisfied by the promise of chaos to come, began to peel away, but not without taking the gossip spark that would light fires behind every closed door in Willowbrook. Margaret retreated, shaken, into her Mercedes. Blackstone walked stiffly beside her, whispering urgently, his hand chopping the air, his expression shifting between calculated logic and sudden dread. I'd rattled them both. When the drive cleared, I looked down at the concrete pad. Torn blueprints floated permanently beneath the top layer, entombed like fragile bones in stone. Proof of this morning's first battle. My grandmother, Eleanor Pierce, had predicted it all. She'd bought this land in 1987, back when it was just dirt trails around a lake, and not the suffocating fortress Margaret had built. Eleanor was the neighborhood's peacemaker, the calm center. People trusted her, loved her. They came to her porch to settle disputes before they ever thought of lawyers. When she passed, I inherited not just her cabin but her records, a lifetime of organized, stubborn documentation. She never joined the HOA, she refused. "Property rights don't dissolve under pressure," she once scrawled in the margin of her notes. "If you yield once, they'll take everything else." By the time she died, she had files on every meeting, every letter, every threat, and every fabricated community decision Margaret had pushed through. Eleanor's handwriting filled pages upon pages. Ironclad records of 7 years of bullying dressed as bylaws, and Margaret, the queen of this little empire, hadn't appeared from nowhere. Her descent from neighbor to tyrant was as documented as my grandmother's resistance. Divorce records from 2016 detailed a brutal separation. Custody hearings confirmed she lost her teenage daughter. The judge's words cut through the legalese with finality. Excessive controlling behavior. The HOA presidency had become her refuge. A place where her need for absolute control could masquerade a civic duty. She'd systematically eliminated opposition, turning board meetings into loyalty tests and community standards into weapons of personal vendetta. The woman's obsession with power manifested in increasingly petty enforcement actions. Residents received fines for mailbox paint colors, lawn ornament placement, and even the species of flowers in their gardens. She'd hired Blackstone not just as legal counsel, but as an enforcer, using the threat of lawsuits to silence dissent. The attorney's arrival in town had coincided with a sharp increase in property violations, and an even sharper decrease in community morale. Late that afternoon, I printed the original no construction sign from the city's planning website, comparing it pixel by pixel with the version Margaret had posted on my property gate. The differences were immediately obvious to anyone with basic computer literacy. The fonts didn't match. The municipal seal was slightly blurred, and the permit numbers referenced non-existent city codes. Margaret's Photoshop skills clearly hadn't kept pace with her ambitions, leaving behind digital fingerprints that would be impossible to explain away in any legitimate forum. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Saw what happened this morning. Meet me at Brewster's Coffee at 6 p.m. I have information you need, Beth. The message felt like the first crack in Margaret's seemingly impenetrable wall of community support. I'd heard whispers about Beth Morrison, a retired librarian who'd supposedly clashed with the HOA over her son's house painting fiasco. If the rumors were true, she might be the ally I desperately needed in this increasingly complex legal chess match. Brewster's coffee shop occupied a converted Victorian house on Main Street, its mismatched furniture and book-lined walls creating the perfect atmosphere for clandestine conversations. Beth Morrison appeared exactly as I'd imagined, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and carrying herself with the confidence of someone who'd spent decades helping people find information. She clutched a manila folder that looked suspiciously similar to mine, her weathered hands trembling slightly as she ordered a large black coffee. "Your grandmother and I were friends," Beth began without preamble, sliding into the booth across from me. Eleanor showed me documents that would make Margaret's hair catch fire if they ever saw daylight. She knew this day would come, knew that someone would eventually challenge the HOA's authority with facts instead of fear. Her voice carried the weight of long-held secrets and carefully nursed grudges. The folder between us seemed to pulse with dangerous potential. Beth opened her collection to reveal a stack of receipts, each bearing Margaret's distinctive signature from various local businesses. "I've been collecting these for 3 years," she whispered, glancing around the nearly empty coffee shop. Every coffee purchase, every lunch meeting, every transaction where she had to sign her name. "Your grandmother taught me that signatures don't lie, even when everything else does." The implications hit me like a physical blow as I realized what Beth was suggesting about Margaret's documented denials. "There's something else," Beth continued, her voice dropping even lower. "In 2018, Margaret came to my house with an offer to resolve our differences privately. She thought I was just another frightened neighbor who would roll over for the right price. But I recorded every word of that conversation, and what she admitted about her real plans for this neighborhood would shock you." The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too exposed, as if Margaret's surveillance network extended everywhere. Beth's revelation about Margaret's recorded admission sent my mind racing through possibilities I hadn't considered before. We spent the next hour hunched over her laptop, searching through archived podcast episodes from 2013 when the local radio station WKRP had featured a series called Community Voices. Episode 17 contained exactly what we were looking for. Margaret's own voice clear as crystal, stating, "Lot number 76 is unrestricted land that falls outside HOA jurisdiction entirely." The timestamp showed 2:47 p.m. on the 15th of November, 2013, just 2 months after she'd assumed the HOA presidency. My hands trembled slightly as I uploaded the audio clip to the neighborhood Facebook group at 11:30 that night. Within 30 minutes, the post had generated 47 comments and 62 shares. Residents who had remained silent for years suddenly found their voices sharing their own stories of Margaret's overreach and arbitrary enforcement. The digital revolution had begun with Margaret's own words, catalyzing community-wide awakening. By morning, the clip had reached 847 views and spawned 3 separate discussion threads about HOA reform. Margaret's response came faster than I anticipated. My phone rang at 7:15 a.m. with an unknown number, her voice oozing false sweetness as she invited me to her home for a private discussion to resolve our misunderstanding. The address she provided led to an imposing colonial mansion on Elm Street, its perfectly manicured lawn and symmetrical flower beds reflecting her obsession with control down to the smallest detail. I accepted her invitation, knowing that desperate enemies often make fatal mistakes when cornered. The interior of Margaret's house felt like a museum dedicated to suburban perfection. Every surface gleamed with obsessive cleanliness, and family photos displayed a history that ended abruptly around 2016, coinciding with her divorce. She led me into her home office, a cramped space dominated by filing cabinets and multiple computer monitors displaying various neighborhood surveillance feeds. The room smelled of lavender air freshener, attempting to mask something stale and suffocating underneath. "Logan, we're both intelligent people," Margaret began, settling behind her massive oak desk like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. "I have the power to make your life in this community either very pleasant or absolutely miserable. The choice depends entirely on how reasonable you're willing to be about this construction project." Her fingers drummed against the desktop with mechanical precision, while her eyes never left my face, searching for signs of weakness or surrender. I noticed the digital recording device sitting conspicuously next to her coffee mug, its red light blinking steadily as she spoke. Margaret's plan became crystal clear: record me making some admission or threat that could be used against me in court. Her confidence suggested she'd used this tactic successfully before, probably against other residents who dared to challenge her authority. The woman was building a library of compromising statements, one conversation at a time. "You know, Margaret," I said casually, reaching for my water glass and deliberately knocking it over, sending liquid cascading across her desk toward the recording device. She lunged forward to save her equipment, frantically dabbing at the spreading puddle with tissues from a decorator box. In her panic to protect the recorder, she'd exposed her true intentions more clearly than any confession could have. The pretense of friendly negotiation evaporated like the water, soaking into her expensive desk bladder. While Margaret focused on electronic damage control, I activated my own phone's recording app with practice stealth. Years of architectural client meetings had taught me the value of documenting important conversations, and this encounter qualified as crucial evidence. My device lay innocuously beside my car keys, its microphone pointed directly at Margaret's increasingly agitated voice, as she realized her carefully planned entrapment had backfired spectacularly. "Fine," she snapped, abandoning all pretense of civility as she salvaged her soggy recording device. "Since you want to play games, let me be clear about something. That ridiculous sign your grandmother refused to acknowledge, I'm sure it applied to your property retroactively." The city planning office was very cooperative once I explained the situation properly. Her admission hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun, more damaging than anything I could have hoped to capture. Margaret's face flushed crimson as she realized what she just confessed to. The illegal retroactive application of zoning restrictions, the implied bribery of city officials, and the deliberate targeting of my family's property rights created a perfect storm of legal liability. She'd handed me enough ammunition to destroy her credibility permanently, all because she couldn't resist gloating about her perceived cleverness. The hunter had become the hunted in the space of a single sentence. "I think our conversation is finished," I said quietly, gathering my keys and phone while Margaret sat frozen behind her ruined desk. Her composure had cracked completely, revealing the desperate, vindictive woman beneath the community leader facade. As I reached the office door, she called out with venom dripping from every word. "You have no idea what you've just started. Pice. This neighborhood has ways of dealing with troublemakers that go far beyond HOA regulations." The drive home felt surreal, as if I'd stepped through a looking glass into a world where respected community leaders openly admitted to corruption. Margaret's threat echoed in my mind, carrying implications that extended far beyond property disputes into darker territory altogether. I'd entered her house as a concerned property owner, and left as a marked man carrying evidence that could topple her entire power structure. The real war was just beginning. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from yet another unknown number. "Pierce, if you want to destroy Margaret permanently, meet me at Oak Hill Park tomorrow at 10 p.m. Come alone, and bring proof you can be trusted." The message felt like stepping into a spy novel, complete with mysterious allies emerging from the shadows. Margaret's web of control was apparently more fragile than anyone had imagined, with cracks appearing faster than she could repair them. Margaret's retaliation arrived with surgical precision. At exactly 8:47 a.m. the following morning, a white van bearing the city's building inspection logo pulled into my driveway, followed immediately by a second vehicle carrying what appeared to be environmental regulators. The lead inspector, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, handed me an emergency stop work order based on anonymous reports of unpermitted construction and potential wetland violations. The paperwork bore fresh timestamps, suggesting Margaret had spent her sleepless night orchestrating this coordinated assault on my project. The inspection team swarmed over my property like investigators at a crime scene, measuring distances to the lake, photographing every angle of the foundation, and taking soil samples with exaggerated precision. Their thoroughness seemed designed more for intimidation than actual assessment. Each measurement announced loudly enough for gathering neighbors to hear. Margaret herself materialized at the property line within minutes, observing the proceedings with barely concealed satisfaction, while maintaining plausible deniability about her involvement in triggering this bureaucratic nightmare. By noon, 3 additional notices had appeared on my door: a zoning compliance review, a request for architectural review board approval, and a demand for updated environmental impact studies. Each document referenced different municipal codes and required separate filing fees totaling nearly $4,000. The coordinated nature of these simultaneous investigations revealed the depth of Margaret's connections within local government and connections I'd seriously underestimated when planning my straightforward construction project. The financial pressure mounted throughout the afternoon as my construction crew sat idle, their daily rates continuing to accumulate while concrete mixers and excavation equipment remained untouched. My contractor, a gruff man named Williams, who'd worked in this area for 30 years, shook his head in disgust at the bureaucratic maze we'd stumbled into. I've never seen anything like this, he muttered, reviewing the stack of contradictory requirements. It's like they're making up new rules just to stop your project specifically. That evening, Margaret's psychological warfare campaign shifted into overdrive. My mailbox received an official-looking letter from Citizens for Community Standards, a group I'd never heard of, demanding I cease all construction activities pending a neighborhood impact assessment. Their turn address led to a P.O. box, but the letterhead included logos from various civic organizations and a list of concerned residents that suspiciously included several HOA board members. The document threatened legal action if I continued violating established community norms and environmental protections. Social ostracism followed quickly behind legal intimidation. My usual breakfast spot, Murphy's Diner, felt noticeably chillier when I arrived Thursday morning. Conversation stopped mid-sentence when I entered, and the normally friendly waitress avoided eye contact while serving my coffee. 3 separate neighbors had canceled their architectural consulting contracts with my firm via email, citing scheduling conflicts and budget constraints with transparent reluctance. Margaret's influence network extended far beyond HOA boundaries into the broader business community. The breaking point came when I discovered someone had been through my garbage during the night, leaving the contents scattered across my driveway in an obvious message about vulnerability and surveillance. Among the strewn papers and food waste, a handwritten note read simply, "Smart people know when to quit." The violation felt personal and primitive, a reminder that civilized legal proceedings could quickly devolve into something much darker and more threatening. Oak Hill Park at 10 p.m. resembled a scene from a Cold War thriller, complete with strategically placed streetlights creating pools of light separated by ominous shadows. I arrived 15 minutes early, parking near the playground, where I could observe approaching vehicles while maintaining multiple escape routes. The mysterious contact materialized from behind the gazebo precisely on time. A woman in her 50s wearing a dark windbreaker and carrying herself with the confident stride of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. "Detective Sarah Torres, Metro PD Financial Crimes Division," she announced quietly, flashing her badge in the lamplight before tucking it away again. "I've been watching Margaret Lanning's activities for 18 months, waiting for someone brave enough or stupid enough to challenge her openly. Your little construction project has created exactly the opportunity I've been hoping for." Her presence transformed my property dispute from neighborhood drama into a potential criminal investigation, raising stakes I hadn't anticipated when I'd first poured that concrete foundation. Torres explained her investigation with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent years building airtight cases against corrupt officials. Margaret's financial records showed suspicious patterns of HOA fund transfers, inflated contractor payments, and unexplained cash withdrawals coinciding with favorable municipal decisions. The detective had documented 17 separate instances where Margaret's personal interests had somehow aligned with beneficial changes to local zoning ordinances, building codes, and environmental regulations that affected property values throughout the district. The problem is proving intent and establishing clear connections between her actions and personal benefit. Torres continued, pulling out a tablet displaying financial spreadsheets that looked like evidence boards from television crime dramas. "What I need is someone on the inside. Someone with legitimate reasons to interact with Margaret and access to her private communications. Your construction project has made you the perfect catalyst for forcing her into mistakes that will expose the larger pattern of corruption." My role in Torres' investigation suddenly became clear. I wasn't just a property owner defending my rights, but an unwitting undercover asset in a major corruption probe. The detective outlined her strategy with military precision, explaining how my continued construction efforts would force Margaret into increasingly desperate and potentially illegal countermeasures. Each escalation would create new evidence trails leading back to her network of municipal conspirators and private beneficiaries. "There's something else you need to know," Torres added, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Margaret isn't working alone in this. We've identified at least 3 other individuals who benefit directly from her zoning manipulation schemes, including someone very close to the mayor's office. Your grandmother's property sits on land that's been targeted for acquisition by a development group with connections to several city council members." The detective handed me a secure cell phone with instructions for maintaining contact while avoiding Margaret's surveillance network. "Use this only for emergencies or when you discover something that can't wait for our scheduled meetings. Remember, from this point forward, everything you do and say around Margaret or her associates is potentially being recorded. You're walking into a trap that's been years in the making, but you're also our best chance of dismantling it permanently." Torres disappeared back into the park's shadows. I stood alone under the streetlight, feeling the weight of responsibility I'd never saw. My simple desire to build a house on inherited land had evolved into participation in a criminal investigation that could topple local government officials and expose years of systematic corruption. The concrete foundation I'd poured just days earlier had become the cornerstone of something much larger and more dangerous than I'd ever imagined possible. Detective Torres's investigation had given me purpose, but it was Beth's phone call at 6:32 a.m. that provided the ammunition I desperately needed. Her voice trembled with excitement as she described her discovery in the HOA's quarterly financial reports. Documents that Margaret had assumed no one bothered reading. "Logan, she's been stealing from the Pet Beautification Fund," Beth whispered urgently. $7,200 transferred directly to Morrison Landscaping. But when I called them, they said they've never done any work for the HOA. The address on file, it's Margaret's home address with a fake business name. The financial records Beth had uncovered revealed a pattern of systematic theft spanning 3 years. Margaret had created fictional vendor accounts using variations of legitimate business names, routing HOA funds through these phantom companies directly into personal accounts. The Pet Beautification Fund was just the beginning. Similar fraudulent transfers appeared in the Community Garden Initiative, the Holiday Decoration Budget, and the Emergency Road Repair Reserve. The total amount exceeded $45,000, transforming petty corruption into felony embezzlement territory. I spent the morning documenting Margaret's financial crimes with the methodical precision my architectural training had instilled. Each transaction required cross-referencing with legitimate business registrations, bank routing numbers, and municipal contractor licenses. The deeper I dug, the more elaborate Margaret's scheme became apparent. She'd created an entire ecosystem of fake companies, complete with professional-look invoices and detailed work orders for services that existed only on paper. The breakthrough came when I accessed the city's historical planning archives, a dusty digital repository that most residents had forgotten existed. Buried in a 2015 zoning dispute file, I found Margaret's own signature on a formal complaint against a different property developer. The document clearly stated Lot 76 falls outside HOA jurisdiction and should remain exempt from community covenants. Her handwriting was unmistakable, and the notarized date proved she'd known the truth about my property for years while publicly claiming otherwise. My grandmother's legacy revealed itself most unexpectedly when I decided to explore the old root cellar beneath where her cabin had stood. The wooden stairs creaked ominously as I descended with a flashlight, expecting to find nothing more than spiderwebs and forgotten preserves. Instead, I discovered a metal filing cabinet my grandmother had somehow overlooked during the estate settlement. The rusty lock yielded easily to a screwdriver, revealing treasures that would reshape everything I thought I knew about this property dispute. Eleanor's personal journal from 1998 contained entries that read like prophecy. That landing woman came by again today, demanding I sign her papers. Told her what I've told everyone else. I don't sign anything that gives strangers power over my family's land. She got angry, said I'd regret making enemies in this neighborhood. Some people think intimidation works on old ladies. They're wrong. The entries continued for months, documenting Margaret's early attempts to force compliance through harassment, and threats that mirrored her current tactics against me. More importantly, the filing cabinet contained my grandmother's copy of the original land survey from 1987, complete with GPS coordinates and boundary markers that had been digitally recorded long before modern HOA overlays. The ancient oak tree on my property appeared prominently in the survey notes, marked as a heritage specimen and designated as the official eastern boundary of the county conservation zone. This designation meant my property enjoyed additional protections that superseded any HOA authority, a legal shield my grandmother had carefully preserved for future generations. The oak tree itself became the key to unraveling Margaret's entire power structure. City records showed it had been included in a 1998 environmental preservation project with GPS coordinates that precisely defined the limits of HOA jurisdiction. My property lay clearly outside those boundaries, making every fine violation notice and construction order Margaret had issued completely invalid. She'd been operating without authority for years, using fear and legal intimidation to enforce rules that had no basis in law. Beth's excitement was contagious when I called to share my discoveries. "Logan, this is even better than I hoped," she said, her librarian instincts fully engaged. "If we can prove Margaret knew about the boundary issue all along, every action she's taken against your family becomes criminal harassment. But there's something else you need to know. I found the receipt from her coffee meeting with Councilman Warren last month. The timestamp matches exactly with when your building permits got mysteriously delayed. The evidence was accumulating faster than I could organize it, each piece fitting into a larger puzzle that revealed Margaret's corruption network. My secure phone buzzed with a text from Detective Torres. Major development in the investigation. Margaret's personal checking account shows deposits matching HOA withdrawal amounts. Can you meet tonight? Same location. 11 p.m. Bring everything you found. Meanwhile, Margaret's desperation manifested in increasingly reckless behavior that suggested she sensed the walls closing in around her. Neighbors reported seeing her driving slowly past their houses at odd hours, photographing properties, and taking notes in a leather-bound journal. Her social media posts had become erratic, ranging from inspirational quotes about leadership to barely veiled threats against troublemakers who don't understand community values. The mask of respectability was slipping, revealing someone teetering on the edge of complete breakdown. The community dynamics shifted noticeably as word spread about Margaret's financial irregularities. Property rights defenders, the informal group that had coalesced around my construction dispute, expanded to include 15 families who discovered their own grievances against HOA overreach. We established a private Facebook group to coordinate legal strategies and share evidence, creating a digital war room that operated beyond Margaret's surveillance capabilities. Dr. Patricia Henley, a retired economics professor whose deck railing violation had cost her $3,000 in legal fees, emerged as the group's unofficial treasurer. Her analysis of HOA financial statements revealed discrepancies dating back to Margaret's first year in office, suggesting the corruption had begun almost immediately after she'd assumed power. This isn't opportunistic theft, Dr. Henley explained during our first official meeting. This is systematic embezzlement, with sophisticated money laundering techniques that required planning and ongoing coordination. The group's research capabilities proved invaluable when we began investigating Margaret's business partnerships. Richard Blackstone's law firm had received nearly $18,000 in HOA legal fees over the past 2 years, primarily for services that involved threatening residents over minor violations. Cross-referencing these payments with actual legal actions revealed a pattern of manufactured disputes designed to generate billable hours while intimidating potential opposition to Margaret's authority. Friday afternoon brought the discovery that would ultimately seal Margaret's fate. While researching municipal contractor databases, I found registration records for Morrison Landscaping that listed Margaret's personal cell phone number as the primary contact. The business license application, signed in her unmistakable handwriting, had been filed just 2 weeks before the first fraudulent payment appeared in HOA records. She'd literally created a fake company to steal from her own organization, leaving a paper trail that any competent investigator could follow. The psychological toll of maintaining her elaborate deception was becoming increasingly visible in Margaret's public appearances. At the grocery store, I observed her having an animated conversation with herself while examining produce, her hands gesturing wildly as if arguing with an invisible opponent. The store clerk mentioned that she'd been asking paranoid questions about who else had been shopping there, suggesting her mental state was deteriorating under the pressure of pending exposure. That evening, as I prepared for my meeting with Detective Torres, my grandmother's words from the journal echoed in my mind. Some battles choose you, Logan. When they do, you fight with everything you have, not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after. Eleanor had understood something about this conflict that I was only beginning to grasp. This wasn't just about property rights or HOA overreach, but about the fundamental question of whether communities would be governed by law or by fear. Detective Torres arrived at Oakle Park carrying a briefcase that looked like it contained enough evidence to topple a small government. Logan, what you've uncovered in the past week has accelerated our timeline considerably, she said, spreading documents across the picnic table under the amber street light. Margaret's financial crimes are worse than initially suspected. She's been running a sophisticated money laundering operation that extends far beyond simple HO embezzlement into municipal contract fraud and property manipulation schemes. The detective's revelations painted a picture of corruption that reached into the highest levels of local government. Margaret had been systematically manipulating zoning decisions to benefit a shadow network of investors who purchased undervalued properties just before convenient regulatory changes increased their worth dramatically. The pet beautification, Fund theft was merely pocket change compared to the millions of dollars in property value she'd helped transfer through insider information and strategic zoning modifications. "There's someone else you need to meet," Torres continued, checking her watch nervously. A figure emerged from behind the park's maintenance building, walking with the careful gait of someone who'd spent years looking over their shoulder. Linda Walsh appeared exactly as I'd imagined a whistleblower would. Middle-aged, professionally dressed despite the late hour, and carrying herself with the determination of someone who decided to risk everything for justice. Linda had served as Margaret's personal secretary for 3 years before her conscience finally overcame her fear of retaliation. "I kept copies of everything," she explained, producing a USB drive that seemed to glow with dangerous potential in the lamplight. "Bank statements, email correspondence, meeting recordings, contract modifications." Margaret thought I was just a loyal employee who followed orders without asking questions. She was wrong about that. Just like she's been wrong about everything else. The USB contained a digital treasure trove that would have made investigative journalists weep with joy. Linda had methodically documented every illegal transaction, every forged signature, and every backroom deal that Margaret had orchestrated during her reign of corruption. Email threads revealed conversations with city council members about expediting zoning changes in exchange for campaign contributions. Audio recordings captured Margaret coaching Blackstone on how to intimidate residents using legal threats that had no basis in actual law. Most damaging of all was Margaret's personal journal, which Linda had photographed page by page during late-night office sessions when her boss was attending city council meetings. The entries read like a masterclass in municipal corruption, detailing elaborate schemes to artificially depress property values in targeted neighborhoods, before arranging for developer friends to purchase them at bargain prices. My grandmother's property had been on Margaret's acquisition list for over 5 years, marked as high priority due to lakefront access and development potential. The community meeting scheduled for the following evening had been planned as a routine HOA monthly gathering, but Margaret's increasingly erratic behavior had transformed it into what felt like a public trial. Word had spread through social media about the financial irregularities and falsified documents, drawing residents who hadn't attended HOA meetings in years. The community center had been forced to relocate the meeting to the high school auditorium to accommodate the overflow crowd that local news stations were now calling the largest grassroots uprising in county history. Margaret's preparation for the meeting revealed someone completely detached from reality. Neighbors reported seeing her practicing speeches in her front yard, gesturing wildly at imaginary audiences while clutching a thick folder of what appeared to be legal documents. She'd hired a professional photographer to document the meeting, apparently believing she could control the narrative through careful image management. Her delusions of continued authority seemed impervious to the mounting evidence of her impending downfall. The student art collective from the local community college had spent the previous weekend creating a mural on the abandoned warehouse wall, visible from the main road into our neighborhood. The artwork depicted a figure in a business suit pointing an accusatory finger at a group of cowering residents with the caption, "When power corrupts, communities resist," painted in bold letters across the bottom. The mural had gone viral on social media, becoming a symbol of grassroots resistance that extended far beyond our specific HOA dispute. Richard Blackstone's law firm attempted damage control by releasing a statement claiming their client had been victimized by a coordinated campaign of harassment and false accusations. The press release backfired spectacularly when investigative reporters began examining the firm's own financial records, revealing retainer payments that coincided suspiciously with favorable municipal decisions. Blackstone himself had gone into hiding, refusing to answer calls from journalists or respond to requests for comment about his role in Margaret's corruption network. The morning of the meeting brought unexpected reinforcements when 3 television news crews arrived to cover what producers were calling a David versus Goliath story of community activism defeating institutional corruption. The media attention had attracted the interest of state-level investigators, adding another layer of scrutiny that Margaret's already fragile mental state couldn't possibly withstand. Her carefully constructed facade of respectability was crumbling in real time. Broadcast live to audiences throughout the region, Dr. Henley had prepared a comprehensive financial presentation that would lay out Margaret's crimes in language even the most disinterested resident could understand. The PowerPoint slides traced money flows from legitimate HOA accounts through fake businesses and into Margaret's personal banking network with the precision of a forensic accounting audit. Each transaction had been verified through bank records, municipal filings, and Linda's insider documentation, creating an ironclad case that would be impossible to dispute or explain away. Beth Morrison had assembled a timeline of Margaret's lies and contradictions that read like a prosecution exhibit in a federal fraud trial. The chronology began with Margaret's 2013 podcast admission about property boundaries and continued through her recent attempts to manufacture violations against my construction project. Each entry included supporting documentation, witness statements, and digital evidence that painted a picture of systematic deception spanning nearly a decade. The auditorium filled 30 minutes before the scheduled meeting time, with overflow crowds gathering in the parking lot to watch live streams on their phones. Local news anchors provided commentary from the steps of the high school, framing the evening as a watershed moment in municipal accountability. The energy felt electric, like the moments before a thunderstorm when the very air seems charged with potential for dramatic change. Margaret arrived precisely at 7 in a black town car that seemed inappropriate for someone supposedly serving the community in a volunteer capacity. She wore a severe navy suit that suggested armor more than professional attire, and her movements had the mechanical precision of someone operating on pure adrenaline and denial. Blackstone accompanied her to the podium, but his usual confidence had been replaced by the nervous energy of a lawyer who knew his client was about to self-destruct spectacularly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Margaret began, her voice carrying across the silent auditorium with artificial authority, "we are gathered tonight to address malicious rumors and coordinated attacks on this organization's integrity." Her opening statement immediately revealed someone completely disconnected from reality, as if she genuinely believed she could talk her way out of documented financial crimes and systematic abuse of power. The presentation that followed resembled watching a controlled demolition in slow motion. I methodically presented the fake construction sign, playing the audio comparison between the original PDF and Margaret's altered version. The audience gasped audibly when the differences became apparent, even untrained ears. Dr. Henley's financial analysis followed, each slide revealing another layer of Margaret's theft and corruption, while the crowd's murmurs grew increasingly angry and disbelieving. When Linda Walsh took the microphone to describe her role in documenting Margaret's crimes, the auditorium fell completely silent, except for the clicking of news cameras capturing every word. Her testimony felt like watching someone confess sins in a cathedral, her voice steady despite the personal risk she faced by exposing years of complicity in Margaret's schemes. The USB drive became Exhibit A in what felt more like a criminal trial than a community meeting. Margaret's complete psychological breakdown began during Linda's testimony and accelerated rapidly as the evidence mounted. She started by interrupting with increasingly frantic objections, then progressed to standing and shouting accusations at various audience members. "This is all fabricated," she screamed, her carefully applied makeup running with perspiration and tears. "They're trying to destroy everything I've built for this community." Her voice cracked on the final words, revealing someone whose grip on reality had finally shattered completely. The climax came when Margaret lunged toward the projection screen displaying her forged bank statements, apparently attempting to physically destroy evidence that existed in dozens of copies. Security guards gently restrained her as she continued shouting incoherently about conspiracies and betrayal, her professional composure completely abandoned in favor of raw, desperate fury. The woman who had terrorized an entire community for 7 years had been reduced to a raving figure being escorted from her own meeting by embarrassed security personnel. The vote of no confidence passed by a margin of 238 to 12, with Margaret's remaining supporters consisting primarily of residents who hadn't attended the meeting. Board members resigned en masse, expressing shock and apologizing to the community for their failure to detect or prevent Margaret's systematic abuse of power. The HOA that had been her personal kingdom for nearly a decade voted itself into temporary receivership pending a complete forensic audit and criminal investigation. The criminal charges against Margaret Lanning arrived with the swift efficiency of a justice system finally functioning as intended. Detective Torres called at 7:15 a.m., exactly 1 week after the auditorium meltdown, to report that the district attorney had filed 17 felony counts, including embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of public trust. The bail amount of $200,000 reflected the severity of her crimes and the flight risk posed by someone who'd spent years manipulating legal systems for personal gain. Richard Blackstone's downfall followed Margaret's arrest by precisely 48 hours. The State Bar Association announced a formal investigation into his law firm's practices after discovering that he'd knowingly filed fraudulent legal documents and participated in what prosecutors were calling an organized criminal enterprise designed to circumvent municipal oversight. His license suspension became permanent when investigators found evidence of similar schemes in 3 other counties. revealing a pattern of corruption that extended far beyond our small lakefront community. Margaret's sentencing hearing drew national media attention as legal experts proclaimed at a landmark case in municipal accountability. Judge Patricia Hoffman imposed the maximum penalty allowed under state law, 7 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation, complete restitution of stolen funds, plus penalties totaling $68,000, and permanent prohibition from holding any position of public trust. The judge's closing remarks became a viral video clip. This defendant weaponized community governance to serve personal greed, betraying the most fundamental principles of democratic participation. The financial recovery exceeded everyone's expectations when forensic accountants traced Margaret's assets through offshore accounts and hidden investments she'd foolishly believed were beyond legal reach. The court-ordered asset seizure included her colonial mansion, luxury vehicles, and a vacation condo in Myrtle Beach that had been purchased entirely with stolen HOA funds. The total recovery of $84,000 not only compensated the community for her theft, but also provided a surplus for actual neighborhood improvements that residents would control directly. My construction project resumed on a Tuesday morning that felt like emerging from a long nightmare into brilliant sunshine. The concrete foundation had cured perfectly during the enforced delay, and my crew approached the work with renewed enthusiasm that reflected the community's collective sense of liberation. Williams, my contractor, grinned widely as he surveyed the site where so much conflict had originated. "Never thought I'd see the day when building a simple house would bring down a corrupt government," he laughed, firing up equipment that had sat idle for nearly a month. Beth Morrison's election as interim HOA president represented more than just new leadership. It symbolized a complete philosophical transformation in community governance. Her first official act dissolved all enforcement committees and replaced them with voluntary advisory groups focused on genuine community improvement rather than petty regulation. The new HOA charter, drafted collaboratively by residents rather than imposed by authoritarian decree, limited the organization's power to essential services, while explicitly protecting individual property rights from future abuse. The reformed HOA's transparency initiatives would have been unthinkable under Margaret's regime. Monthly financial statements became available online with real-time updates. All meetings were live-reamed with archived recordings, permanently accessible toursidents, and every expenditure over $50 required documented approval from at least 3 board members. Linda Walsh, pardoned in exchange for her cooperation with prosecutors, became the volunteer treasurer responsible for implementing accountability, measures that made future corruption virtually impossible. Dr. Henley spearheaded the creation of a community rights education center that provided free legal resources to residents throughout the county. The center offered workshops on property law, HOA governance, and citizen advocacy that empowered ordinary people to recognize and resist institutional abuse before it could take root. Her expertise in financial analysis became the foundation for training programs that taught residents to identify the warning signs of embezzlement and fraud in their own communities. The Student Art Collective's warehouse mural evolved into a permanent installation, commemorating the community's victory over corruption. Local businesses contributed funds for professional restoration and protective coating that would preserve the artwork for future generations. The mural became a pilgrimage site for activists from other communities facing similar struggles, with visitors leaving messages of solidarity and hope on a designated comment wall that grew into its own form of public art. My grandmother's heritage oak tree received official designation as a county landmark, complete with a brass plaque recognizing Eleanor Pierce's role in preserving community independence through careful documentation and principled resistance. The tree's GPS coordinates became the cornerstone of a new municipal mapping system that clearly defined jurisdictional boundaries and prevented future disputes about regulatory authority. The simple act of measuring distance from an ancient oak had become the foundation for protecting countless families from bureaucratic overreach. The house that rose on my grandmother's foundation incorporated design elements that honored both her memory and the community's hard-won victory. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the lake she'd loved, while aura-around porch provided space for the kind of neighborly conversations that build genuine community bonds. The architectural style blended traditional craftsmanship with modern sustainable features, creating a home that naturally belonged in its lakefront setting without requiring anyone's permission or approval. 6 months after Margaret's sentencing, the housewarming celebration drew over 200 guests, representing every family that had suffered under her authoritarian rule. The gathering felt like a community healing ceremony, with former adversaries sharing stories and laughter, while children played freely on property that had once been a battleground. Detective Torres attended as an honored guest, accepting recognition for her role in exposing corruption that might otherwise have continued indefinitely. The evening's most powerful moment came when I presented Beth with Eleanor's original property survey, now framed and matted as a symbol of the documentation that had made victory possible. "This belongs in the community center," I announced to applause that seemed to echo across the lake itself. "Every future resident should understand that their rights exist independently of anyone's permission, and that sometimes the most important battles are fought with paper and persistence rather than anger and intimidation." Local news coverage of the celebration focused on transformation rather than retribution, emphasizing HOA community had chosen healing over vengeance in the aftermath of systematic abuse. The story became a template for municipal reform advocates nationwide, demonstrating that ordinary citizens could successfully challenge entrenched corruption through careful preparation, strategic cooperation, and unwavering commitment to truth over convenience. Margaret's final chapter unfolded quietly in a minimum security federal facility in Alabama, where she participated in counseling programs designed to address the psychological disorders that had driven her obsession with control. Prison reports indicated that she'd begun acknowledging responsibility for her actions while working in the facility's legal library, helping other inmates understand their rights and navigate the appeals process, even in confinement. She'd found a way to influence legal outcomes. Though now in the service of justice rather than personal gain, the legacy of our confrontation extended far beyond property lines or municipal boundaries into questions about how communities balance individual rights with collective responsibilities. My simple desire to build a house on inherited land had become a case study in democratic accountability, demonstrating that citizen vigilance remains the most effective protection against the gradual erosion of freedom through bureaucratic intimidation and regulatory manipulation. Standing on my completed porch as autumn painted the lakefront in brilliant colors, I reflected on my grandmother's prescient words about listening to the land stories before building upon it. The story this property had told was ultimately about the eternal struggle between those who seek to control others and those who refuse to surrender their inherent dignity. Eleanor's careful preservation of documents and principled resistance to intimidation had provided the foundation for victory. But the real construction project had been rebuilding a community's faith in its own power to demand accountability from those who claim to serve its interests. What would you do if a power-hungry HOA tried to steal your family's land? Logan's incredible journey from harassment victim to corruption fighting hero proves that ordinary people can defeat institutional bullies when armed with facts, patience, and unwavering determination. This story reveals how careful documentation, strategic alliances, and refusing to be intimidated can topple even the most entrenched corruption. Ready for more inspiring tales of justice prevailing over abuse of power? Hit that like button and subscribe to Harper Stories for weekly doses of satisfying comebacks and real-world victories that'll restore your faith in standing up for what's